This day and time. What happened today, years ago?
You know, sometimes you look at a date, just glance at the calendar, and it seems, well, pretty ordinary.
Just another day.
Exactly. But then you start digging, you actually look into it, and you find these moments, often centuries apart, happening on the exact same day.
And they weave together these incredible stories, don't they? Rebellion, conflict, even big cultural shifts. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And today, we're doing one of our deep dives into just one of those dates, June 5th.
Yeah, we've pulled together a stack of, well, really interesting material, looking at this single date through three very different perspectives.
And our mission really is to unpack all that, not just lay out the facts, you know?
Right. We want to find those key insights, maybe some surprising connections that tie these seemingly separate events together, all linked by June 5th.
Absolutely. So we're looking at the Paris Uprising of 1832.
Then jumping way forward at the start of the Six-Day War in 1967.
And then another leap right into our time, almost the European release of the film Gladiator back in 2000.
It's quite a mix. So yeah, get ready to see how one day connects street barricades in 19th century France
to the desert sands of the Middle East in the 20th century.
And then boom, the bright lights of a 21st century movie premiere. It's wild when you think about it like that.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start in Paris. Back in 1832,
Okay.
our sources, they really paint this picture of France as being, well, pretty unsettled. Even after the whole revolutionary period and Napoleon.
The monarchy was back, but that didn't mean stability had returned. Not at all.
Right.
The material really stresses that early 19th century France was basically a powder keg. You had this restored Bourbon monarchy, but a huge chunk of the population, especially, workers, students, they felt totally disconnected, alienated, really.
And then there were other factors too, right?
Absolutely. Add in economic hardship, real poverty, and on top of that, a terrible cholera epidemic sweeping through Paris. I mean, the discontent was just simmering, ready to boil over.
And June 5th, 1832, becomes this sort of unexpected flashpoint, triggered by, of all things, a funeral.
Yeah, it's amazing how these things start sometimes. What the material highlights is the funeral for General Lamarque.
He's a popular guy.
Very popular. A former military commander, seen as a liberal figure. And his death, well, it became a lightning rod for all those built-up grievances.
So it wasn't like a planned revolution.
Not really, no. That's the thing. It wasn't planned as an insurrection, but the funeral procession itself it transformed, spontaneously became this massive anti-government protest.
And from that, we get the famous Paris barricades.
Exactly. The sources describe, young people, students, workers just seizing the moment, throwing up these makeshift defenses in the narrow streets. It was desperate, really. An impassioned cry for a republic, for different leadership. It was chaotic, sure, but a chaos fueled by really deep frustration.
Now, this uprising, it didn't actually last long, did it?
No, not at all. It was brutally put down within a couple of days. Militarily speaking, a definite failure for the rebels.
Right. A failure by most accounts.
And militarily, yes, a clear defeat. But what's really fascinating, and what the sources make very clear, is that the spirit of it, that didn't just die out. This brief, violent explosion of, well, idealism and desperation, it got captured, immortalized, really.
And that brings us to Victor Hugo, Les Misérables.
Precisely. That's one of the really interesting angles in the material. Hugo, writing decades later, takes this specific historical moment, these, largely anonymous people fighting and dying on the barricades, and he embeds them right into this epic story that gives them this enduring global recognition. So the uprising itself failed.
But the story lived on.
Exactly. Through the novel, it became this incredibly powerful symbol, a symbol of the struggle for justice, the resilience of the human spirit against, overwhelming odds.
So the real insight isn't just that it happened and failed. It's about how its meaning just grew, amplified through art and literature. It became a story about what it costs to fight for your ideals.
And it raises this important question, which the sources kind of prompt you to think about. How do events that might seem like historical footnotes, how do they gain this significance and keep resonating? Often it is through these cultural retellings. It becomes less about the actual battle, maybe, and more about the enduring idea.
Okay, so from those street barricades in 1832, Let's make a big jump. Over a century forward, different continent entirely. June 5th, 1967.
Right. A date marking a completely different kind of upheaval, this time in the Middle East.
The tension there had been building for a long time.
Oh, incredibly volatile. The material really describes the lead up. I mean, the whole period since the 1948 Arab-Israeli War was just continuous friction, border clashes, really heated rhetoric escalating on all sides. By early June 67, the air was thick. You could feel conflict was coming.
And according to the sources we looked at, on June 5th, Israel launched a preemptive strike.
That's right. The core of the material really focuses on the speed, the decisiveness of that initial Israeli air attack. They mainly targeted the Egyptian Air Force while it was still on the ground.
Surprise attack.
A devastatingly effective one. And that action very quickly spiraled into a full-scale war, pulling in Syria and Jordan as well.
And what followed was just incredibly swift. 6 days. That's why it's called the 6-Day War.
Exactly. And in just those 6 days, the whole map of the region was, well, drastically redrawn.
The consequences were huge.
Immense. And incredibly long-lasting. The sources detail them clearly. Israel occupied significant territory, the Gaza Strip, the entire Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. This victory just fundamentally shifted the military and geopolitical balance in the Middle East.
And beyond the map changes, it triggered a massive humanitarian crisis.
Absolutely. That's a critical point the material highlights, the significant displacement of Palestinian populations.
Yeah.
It created a major refugee crisis that continues, to shape the region even today.
So this war didn't really resolve the tensions.
Not at all. It dramatically reshaped them. It created new facts on the ground, embedded these incredibly difficult issues that are still right at the heart of peace talks, or lack thereof, and the ongoing conflict, especially in places like Gaza and the West Bank.
So June 5th, 1967. It's not just the start date of a war. It's like a hinge point in history that created the regional structure we're still grappling with. The impact is just undeniable, still unfolding.
Exactly. It's a date that really represents this rapid, profound shift in power dynamics in a really crucial part of the world. And the consequences just reverberate decades and decades later.
Okay, now let's make another leap. Totally different sphere. Into the 21st century this time, June 5th, 2000.
Right.
No barricades, no airstrikes this time. Instead, a global cultural event, the release of the film Gladiator in Europe.
Yeah, it seems like a lighter topic maybe, but the sources find something really interesting here in the context.
What was the context back then?
Well, think about Hollywood at the turn of the millennium. Lots of contemporary action films, comedies, maybe sci-fi, and then Gladiator arrives, offering something, well, different. This sprawling, really emotional, historical epic set in the ancient world.
And that story really hit home, didn't it? Maximus, the general who's betrayed, forced into slavery, fighting his way back through the arena for honor, for revenge.
Right. The material points out how the film just tapped into these really timeless themes. Duty, loss, corruption, the fight for justice against overwhelming power. It had the spectacular action, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
But it also had this really compelling human story right at its core. And audiences just connected with that deeply.
And its success was, well, it was huge. Critically, commercially, everywhere.
It certainly was. The sources detailed the massive box office, the impact of the Academy Awards Best Picture, Best Actor for Russell Crowe, big wins. But the insight here, it goes beyond just the awards and the money.
It really feels like it kicked off a revival, didn't it, of that whole genre?
Yes, exactly. The material highlights how Gladiator's success is widely credited with reigniting mainstream interest in, well, ancient history and epic films generally. After Gladiator, you saw this wave of other historical blockbusters, Troy, Kingdom of Heaven, 300.
Right.
It showed the studios that there was actually this massive appetite out there for these kinds of grand stories.
And more than just inspiring other movies, it felt like it made ancient Rome, cool again for a whole new audience.
It absolutely did. It definitely made the Colosseum, gladiators, emperors.
Yeah.
It made it all feel accessible and exciting again, maybe for a generation that hadn't thought much about it.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how a fictionalized historical story can just powerfully capture the public imagination on this massive scale. It influences other films, sure, but also just general cultural curiosity. It's a different kind of impact than war or rebellion, obviously. Yeah. But still, significant in its own way.
So when we step back and look at all this material together, June 5th just emerges as this really incredible thread, linking these three moments across centuries, across continents.
Yeah, it's quite something.
Each one's so different. You've got a brief, failed rebellion, a swift war that completely reshaped a region,
and a massive cultural phenomenon sparked by a movie.
But all of them just packed with intense human drama and all having really significant consequences down the line.
And the sources really bring us back to that core idea, don't they? That history isn't just dry dates and facts in a textbook.
No.
It's filled with human struggle, with grand aspirations, sometimes brutal consequences, and yeah, even the power of storytelling on a big screen.
And despite those vast differences, the spirit of resistance in Paris,
The dramatic redrawing of the Middle East map.
the revival of epic movies,
Yeah.
they all unfold, at least in part, on this one single date, June 5th.
And they share these underlying themes that the sources kind of pull out, whether
Yeah.
you're looking at the barricades or the battlefield or, the movie set.
Yeah.
These stories are fundamentally about people striving, surviving, adapting, searching for some kind of meaning in the face of these immense forces.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how the material shows these huge shifts, often pivoting on surprisingly specific moments, sometimes almost mundane moments. A funeral procession turns into a riot.
A swift military decision made early one morning.
The premiere date of a film in European cinemas. Little hinges swinging big doors.
Exactly. These moments, just aligned across time on the same calendar date, they really serve as this powerful reminder of history's dynamism and its enduring human themes playing out in these wildly different arenas.
So something for you, the listener, to maybe think about as you go about your day. What other dates might hold these kinds of surprising hidden connections across different eras, different kinds of events that maybe you haven't noticed before?
Yeah, how do these moments from the past, whether they come through conflict or social upheaval or even through culture, like a film, how do they continue, maybe subtly, maybe obviously, to shape our world and how we understand ourselves today?
Worth pondering. Think about that for a bit.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.